If you were a fan of horror games back in the early 1990s, then there was nothing gorier and more disgusting than Splatterhouse, Namco's nightmare-fueled beat-em-up. To celebrate spooky season, I wanted to take a look back at the critical reception of Splatterhouse on the TurboGrafx, as well as the Genesis sequels, Splatterhouse 2, and of course Splatterhouse 3. These games sure are gooey, but are they actually worth playing? To answer that question, I decided to flip through the pages of Electronic Gaming Monthly, Video Games and Computer Entertainment, GamePro, and more classic magazines that reviewed this trilogy back when it first came out. Oh, I sure hope you brought a mop and a good scrub brush, because we're making a real mess in this episode of Splatterhouse Review Crew.
So, you want to know the story of Splatterhouse, the new horror video game for TurboGrafx 16? They say he stalks the old haunted mansion. They say he's looking for his girlfriend. They say his only weapon against the maggot-eaten ghouls who took her is a 2x4. And you say you want to play this game? Splatterhouse. Only for the TurboGrafx 16 system from NEC.
What do you get if you mix beat-em-up games like Kung Fu Master and Vigilante with some of the biggest horror franchises of the 1980s? If you're Namco, then the result is Splatterhouse, a side-scrolling brawler that trades gang members for ghosts, monsters, and things that go bump in the night. Originally released in American arcades in 1989, this gross-out action game wears its influences on its sleeve, taking inspiration from Friday the 13th, The Evil Dead, Poltergeist, and of course, H.P. Lovecraft. The result was a gory romp that managed to stand out from the pack of urban-based beat-em-ups. It was also one of the first must-play arcade conversions on the TurboGrafx 16, a system that was desperately trying to keep up with the competition's own ghouls and ghosts. Let's go ahead and see what the critics said about the ports of Splatterhouse. Now, I say ports, plural, because some critics decided to review the version on FM Town's Marty. That was the case with Edge, which gave Splatterhouse the lowest score of any magazine, a 5 out of 10. That said, their issue was the hardware limitations, not necessarily the quality of the game. When it comes to the lowest score for the TurboGrafx 16 version, look no further than Video Games and Computer Entertainment, which gave it a 6 out of 10. Although the soundtrack is not as catchy as some other TurboGrafx 16 games, it's suitably spooky in an odd sort of way and matches the game well. The graphics and sound effects are better than average, creating the right atmosphere for a video game horror romp. In general, Splatterhouse is an entertaining haunted house saga aimed at Ghostbusters in training everywhere. I doubt, however, the weak at heart will care much for this blood feast. It's violent, gross, grotesque, depraved, and completely lacking in class. Guess that's why I like it. Moving on up the scale, we see GameZone give the TurboGrafx version a 4 out of 6, while Die Hard Game Fan gave the Marty port a 79%. That brings us to Electronic Gaming Monthly, who ended up liking Splatterhouse, with all 4 critics giving the game a solid 8 out of 10 rating. Martin summed it up this way: from start to finish, Splatterhouse is a visually stunning game. Your hero wields big sticks and butcher knives and finally dukes it out with special boss characters and rooms. Action games have been around before, but never like this. Steve agreed, concluding that Splatterhouse, while tamed down from the Little Scene arcade, is another fantastic example of how good turbo games can be. The game, albeit short, is challenging and graphically outstanding, with visual blood reds and puke greens. I love it! Now when it comes to the highest score, that distinction belongs to computer and video games. Giving Splatterhouse an impressive 92%, Richard summed it up this way: crikey! This is a real gourmet beat-em-up. Ugh. What really makes this a cut above the other engine beat-em-ups is the truly revolting visuals. Even more disgusting than some of the public lava in Birmingham. Yes, that bad. Some of the end-level bosses are simply astounding. The chainsaw-wielding maniac is awesome, and he's even accompanied by a dentist drill noise. You won't complete this game in too much of a hurry either. The difficulty level is set just right, allowing game progress on every attempt. What we're dealing with here is a roaringly good conversion, which stands up as a terrific engine game in its own right. With an overall score of 71%, the critics mostly like Splatterhouse, especially on the TurboGrafx. For what it's worth, if we remove the slightly lower scores for the FM Towns version, the average doesn't change all that much, going from 71% up to 75%. This is a really solid start for the Splatterhouse series. Despite the original Splatterhouse being a reasonable hit on the TurboGrafx 16, when it came to developing the hotly anticipated sequel, Namco decided to make a big change and turn it into a Genesis exclusive. But don't worry about feeling lost, Sega fans, because this 1992 sequel is the very definition of more of the same. Although it comes with new levels, improved graphics, and more disgusting bosses, the whole thing still felt awfully familiar to anybody that played the original. Let's see if that ends up being a problem when the critics reviewed Splatterhouse 2. Now, while Electronic Gaming Monthly still liked this sequel, there was a noticeable dip when it came to the average score, going from an 8 out of 10 down to a 7.25 out of 10. Ed ended up being the only EGM critic to give the sequel an 8. Arguing that this is a fantastic sequel to a great game. It's good that Namco decided to keep the gore in, as otherwise it would have lost a lot. Definitely not an easy game, as it's set on the hard side. The music is exceptional, as it fits in with the theme of the game. Overall, an excellent game, and the best Genesis game so far this year. Fake Ninja Sushi X, on the other hand, was not as enthusiastic. If Splatterhouse 2 had a little better control, it would be a hot title. As it is, it's only above average. Still, if you want a good gross-out game, this is the one. Exploding stomachs, enemies cut in two, characters eaten alive, and even more foes squashed into a gooey mess of protoplasm. What more could a kid ask for? Now, one thing you'll notice when you look at the review scores is the British press was a lot more down on Splatterhouse 2 than their American counterparts. Mean Machines gave the game a 73%, while Mega Drive Advanced Gaming went with a 72%. Sega Force, on the other hand, went way lower, giving the sequel a 63%. Before we go ahead and look at the lowest review, I first want to check in with Video Games and Computer Entertainment, who gave the game, again, a 6 out of 10. Splatterhouse 2's background graphics are colorful and well drawn. However, don't expect to see anything that looks much like the real world. This is a nightmare fantasy filled with very strange locales. The creatures' animations, too, are effective, if not downright gross. All in all, though, Splatterhouse 2 comes off as little more than a repeat performance. More of the same hack and slash that was featured in its predecessor. While the game may please those that like the previous effort, Splatterhouse 2 does nothing to advance the genre. Alright, if you want to find the lowest score, then we once again need to visit the United Kingdom, where Sega Power went all the way down to a 47%. They liked the cartload of continues, the large sprites, and the satisfying gruesome explosions. But at the same time, they complain that it's not as gory as it could have been, it's repetitive, and it's dull with annoying music. What a load of tosh! The gameplay's dull and repetitive, the graphics aren't gory, and the whole thing's not worth a first, second, or third glance. Boring! When it comes to the high scores, you saw Sega Vision give Splatterhouse 2 a solid 80%, while Game Informer went all the way up to an 8.7 out of 10. However, it is, as always, GamePro that ended up giving the sequel the highest marks, going with a perfect 5 out of 5. If you missed the fun of the original Splatterhouse, don't miss out on Splatterhouse 2. It's a bit on the gooey side, but don't let that bother you. If you can't appreciate Splatterhouse's gross-out factor, you can surely appreciate its other redeeming qualities, which includes awesome graphics, neato sound effects and music, Mondo challenge, and non-thumb-threatening character control. If you've ever wanted to get revenge on all those early childhood closet monsters, now's your chance to do it vicariously through Splatterhouse 2. Good to the last splat. Look, despite the higher highs and the lower lows, this Splatterhouse sequel actually manages to improve on the original with an overall score of 72%. Part of the reason for this is there are simply a lot more magazines covering this game, especially when it comes to the UK press. Between the first game getting a 71% and now this game getting a 72%, the series is surprisingly consistent. Let's see if that continues with the third and final 16-bit entry.
PC エンジン592色スーパービジュアル6チャンネルリアルサウンドニューワールドを制覇する PC エンジン全開 NEC から。
While it was certainly easy to criticize Splatterhouse 2 for being something of a retread of the first game, the same cannot be said about Part 3. Released in 1993, this time under the watchful eye of versatile developer Now Production, Splatterhouse 3 took some real chances with both the structure of the gameplay and the story. Instead of just mimicking an arcade game like the first two, this final 16-bit installment actually feels like a console game, complete with non-linear exploration, more room to move around, and best of all, a whole bunch of good, bad, and, well, just plain weird endings. That said, even with all these improvements, it is still a very simple beat-em-up at its heart. A genre that critics had largely written off by 1993. Let's see if that had any impact on what the critics thought of Splatterhouse 3. After being a little bit disappointed by the previous sequel, Electronic Gaming Monthly felt that Splatterhouse 3 was a step in the right direction. They ended up giving the game an average score of 8.2 out of 10, up slightly from the 8 out of 10 they gave the original. This is a guilty pleasure. The control is near perfect, and the ability to become a muscle-bound destroyer is an excellent option. Things are very violent here, and at times extremely disturbing, but this game delivers. When Die Hard Game Fan reviewed the game in their 8th issue, they gave it an 82%, the exact same score as EGM. Hyper went a few points lower, giving it a 78%, while Mean Machine Sega went one tick lower, giving it a 77%. That's the same score you saw from Game Informer, with Paul, the pro player, explaining that the Friday the 13th look-alike is back in time for the Halloween season. The oozing, disintegrating monsters look great, and I like how some even do a fish flop when you deliver that final blow. Overall, the graphics are eerie and the animation is somewhat mediocre. Fans of the arcade and previous home versions should really like this card. Now, once again, the lowest score belongs to Sega Power. That's the bad news. The good news is that Sega Power actually gave the game a 61%. That's up 14 points over Splatterhouse 2. That's a big improvement. As frightening as Sooty and about as difficult to play as Breathing Air. There are only 6 fairly easy levels in all, and the gameplay has been done to death. Next, please. Also, just in case you're wondering, this is Sooty. Frightening, I know. On the flip side of the scale, we see GamePro go from giving the middle chapter a perfect 5 out of 5 to giving Splatterhouse 3 a 4.5 out of 5. They're one of the only magazines to actually give the third installment a lower score. Now, as crazy as it sounds, it was the resurrected version of Electronic Games that ended up giving this final Genesis game the highest score, which was a 91%. Splatterhouse 3 is the goriest and meanest entry in the series. Most monsters get more gross and bloody with each blow Rick delivers on them. There are also a wider variety of weapons available this time, and you can keep them to fight the boss characters. However, if Rick is hit while holding a weapon, he will drop it on the ground and must be picked up before a ghost comes and takes it away. If it is whisked away, don't fret, it goes to a room on the floor where all weapons are taken, and it can be reclaimed there. However, this becomes something of a problem when fighting bosses, for Rick has to kill them before he can leave the room. The game's a blast to play and could probably only be released on the Genesis. A censored version of the game on the Super NES would be unthinkable, but nonetheless probable. Thankfully, there was no censored version on the Super NES. Just this disgusting gore fest on the Genesis, which also marked the end of the Splatterhouse series until the 2010 reboot. Now when it comes to Splatterhouse 3, the game scores an overall average of 80%, making this the best reviewed entry in this series by quite a large margin. While fans can certainly argue over which game is best, there's no debate when it comes to the critics. Splatterhouse went out on a high note.
Welcome to Splatterhouse.
PC エンジンスプラッターハウスナムコ
Hey, thanks for watching me break down these classic reviews. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new episodes of Review Crew almost every week, usually when a classic game gets added to a modern console. Now, here's the question I have for you. What's your favorite Splatterhouse game? Is it one of the games that we just talked about? Or maybe it's that crazy Famicom game or the 2010 reboot? Let me see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back next week with more reviews, plus more spooky Review Crew episodes throughout the month, including Luigi's Mansion. While you wait for that, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.